Well, hello, welcome to a lesson before writing. I'm Ted Morrissey here with my co-hosts, Grant Tracy. This is Grant's most recent book that we've published, Five Hard Bites. But it's a collection of Hayden Fuller novels and a novella and a short story. But Grant has since sent me a new Hayden Fuller novel, so we'll be working on that one of these days. And also here with Brady Harrison. And this is Brady's most recent book that we've published, The Term Between, a collection of stories. And Brady, too, is waiting for me to get in gear to get a novel out into the world. But we should be working on that very soon. And while I'm my book, Delta of Cassiopeia, collection of stories and sonnets, which came out a few months ago. It's getting some decent reviews. Not a lot of traffic, but what can you do? And I also will plug that earlier this summer we published, 12 Winters Press published John Paul Jaramillo's Carlos Montoya, a novel that follows up John Paul's earlier novel that we published, Little Mocos, a few years ago. And so that's all the plugging I'm going to do. And here we are. So last month, in last installment of this podcast, we were going to talk about authorial identity, and we didn't get around to it. So we're going to start off this time with that, and I'll just give a brief context here, and then we'll let Brady and Grant jump in accordingly. So the reason I was thinking about like the sort of authorial image that an author puts out to the world is because I was teaching this class, I'm about to teach it again, where students, undergraduates, have to create like a web page or a blog that is, kind of presenting their authorial image to the world. They also have to link a social media account to it. The context being, I think the suggestion being that it's a necessary step for writers to do, for the world to find your work, etc. And that's a whole nother issue I suspect we might get into a little bit here. But I also mentioned to these guys that I've got a lot of students who are freaking out over it because they're putting so much pressure on themselves to create just the right website and to present themselves in just the right world. They don't do it just right. Their writing career is over. I mentioned too that some of the students who write multiple kinds of things, they write, they want to write novels and they write poetry and they do whatever. They're wondering if they should have like different pen names and different websites for these different, and they're really, really stressing out over it. I don't think it's probably something to stress out over. But anyway, that's why I was thinking about it. And so I will just sort of stop talking for a little bit and see what you all have to say about that or anything related to authorial identity.
Well, go for it, Grant.
Okay, well, you think my Seattle Pilots hat? It's awesome, right? Anyway, I guess I'm of the mind, like if an author feels, I don't know about the whole Facebook platform, all that stuff, but like I feel it's cool, like when Stephen King was Bachman for some of those, Richard Bachman for some of those novels, and the fact that Ed McBain, which isn't his real name, his birth name is like Salvatore Lombino, and with an Italian name like that in the 50s, they thought it couldn't be marketable, so he came up with the name Evan Hunter to sell his literary novels like Blackboard Jungle and Mr. Budwing and things like that. And then he, as he developed 87th Precinct series and the Hard Crime series, he wanted a different name because it was a different venue, a different mode of expression. So he became Ed McBain. And I think of, Donald Westlake, who wrote a series of Dortmunder novels. And then when he came up with the Parker series, real, hard ass criminal, the name didn't work. So he came up with a pseudonym, Richard Stark, which is perfect for that. So I'm all for it. If people want to express themselves in different venues with different names, pseudonyms, it's a long-standing tradition. And I got nothing against it, I guess. I think it's kind of cool.
And so, Grant, can I ask you,
Yeah.
in your own writing the Hayden Fuller mysteries, but simultaneously having a scholarly career, but you didn't invent a pen name for your fiction, and you've moved from literary short stories uh, to action stories. I mean, you write all these different kinds. And so, have you yourself thought of? Did you ever consider creating an alternative grant for?
That's so interesting. No, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
I didn't. And maybe part of it is, I already have an alternative grant, which is, when I was 9 years old, my parents changed our last name. I guess maybe 8 years old. I was in third grade anyway, and uh, my dad I'm of a Macedonian origin, yeah, and my mom's Macedonian origin, and they were second generation immigrants, and my dad always felt the last name Traichev had a bit of a commie ring to it, and it he tells this story, or he told this story, and I think it's probably a true story, or at least it's true to his experience. He put in an offer on a home, everything was going great, but once the person saw the signature on the other end, the offer got declined. This was like
Oh.
in 65 or 66. And then eventually, after he finally did get an offer that went through, but he always felt like somehow his name was holding him back, and my mom felt the same way. And there's a whole history in my, I don't want to get too deep into this, but rhinoplasties done by various aunts, and to fit in to get that Bob Hope ski jump nose, whereas I'm a male, I can go au natural, but that was kind of a thing with the children of the 40s and 50s, and so the name change was kind of a thing, and so for the longest time I felt I was going to change my name back to Traichev once I started publishing, and then I got married, and it was like my wife was going to give up her name, but one of the things that made it work, so we didn't have a hyphenated name, she took my name, but it wasn't really my birth name, so it's kind of this weird thing, like it all works. So all the kids are got Tracy, I'm a Tracy, but every once in a while I get things from Irish organizations, when you look into my family tree, and I'm like, hey guys, I'm not that Tracy, but I think that's why my parents picked the name. They wanted something that wasn't quite Anglo, but would fit in more with kind of, Toronto at that time was pretty much a English Irish kind of place, or the Toronto Maple Leafs be called the St. Pats. So that gives you an idea just how big the Irish population was in Toronto in the 20s. So anyway, that's my story. So I already feel like I have a pseudonym for a name that I just learned to live with and embrace, I guess.
Yes, you've had a pen name all along.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I have no trust in names, and I won't tire anyone out with the details of the story, but some names belong to folks and other names do not. And so getting back to Ted's point and thinking about what Grant has been talking about, I kind of like the idea of a pen name or a nom de guerre or a pseudonym. One writer I've always been fascinated with, and I don't suppose anybody even remembers him now or would even care. And I'm not even perfectly sure how to say his name. He took a pseudonym, but it was only one word, one name. It was Trevanian or Trevanian. I'm not sure. And most famous, I suppose, because one of his novels was adapted into a movie starring Clint Eastwood, The Eiger Sanction. And it was originally intended as a kind of spoof of the spy genre, but it was so successful and people liked it so well, they played it a little straighter in the movie. It has one of the great mountain climbing adventure scenes, I think, ever. But what I really liked about Trevanian is that, except for the sequel to The Eiger Sanction, his novels are all very different. He wrote serious crime fiction. He wrote serious literary fiction, all under the names. And so this name seems to create, or at least I have the impression, or I want to attach the narrative to the name, that it created this freedom in him to be a bunch of different writers along the way. I'm not sure that, I have no idea how he saw it, but that's how I want to
Yeah.
see it. And so for my own part, I've been working on and off for years on a kind of thriller uh, set during the Vietnam War. And if I ever complete that book, I have a pseudonym, a pen name already picked out. And so I'm rattling on, and I will stop. But another issue that Ted raised, we want to come back to, I think it is really a whole separate world, is the online presence. I mean, whether you're yourself or whatever name you go by in your writing, trying to promote yourself, that seems to me something of vital interest and certainly worth talking about, particularly for young writers, new writers, and even seasoned veterans such as ourselves. I'll stop talking, Ted, but the other day when I was thinking about us getting together, besides remembering that we're not allowed, Grant, to talk about hockey.
Although Austin Matthews signed a 4-year extension.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's got great hands. Yeah. I was sort of roughly counting up the number of books we have between us, and I'm wondering what that means too. But that's a whole other conversation. So, Ted, I haven't addressed directly or seized upon or touched upon even your students' anxieties about how they should present themselves, but I'm wholly in favor of a pen name, or inventing a name, or using your own name, or using a name that your folks decided to change to, even if the Irish North Americans are after you.
Well, you know,
Go ahead, Ted.
I'm fine too with people using pen names, and I think of the Portuguese writer Pessoa, who wrote all kinds of things and would use different pen names for his poetry versus his short stories versus his novel versus his screenplays versus his criticism, and it was just a matter of course. But I think one of the difficulties today with that is, again, this idea of if you do have to create an online presence, and that's a whole nother issue which I do want to touch on here briefly, in order to try to get people to be looking at your books and so forth, it's enough trouble to have like one website, that it focuses your authorial presence. I can't imagine. Well, I do have multiple websites I try to maintain because of the press and because of my own writing, etc. And it's tricky, to have that many things going on. And so from a practicality standpoint, nowadays, since most authors are having to sort of, present themselves, they can't just write a book and give it to a publisher and let the publisher kind of take it from there. That it just kind of complicates things, because you're trying to maintain, and you're going to have multiple Twitter accounts, you're going to have multiple this, you're going to have multiple that. I mean, it just seems like, today that if you are expected to have these different media, apparatuses, that the more names you have for your writing, it just exponentially grows the number of things you're trying to keep going and keep active and so forth. So I think there is that. And then I think the other irony is, most of us have so much trouble getting any kind of name recognition associated with our work. I can't imagine spending all these years trying to get people to realize that Ted Morrissey is a writer. Now I'm going to use some other name, and I'm going to start from scratch, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, it's hard enough to get people to recognize you as a writer and know what your books are, without trying to get people to recognize 4 different authors with 4 different kinds of books, etc.
Well, even Stephen King had to give up Bachman, or decided to. So,
Yeah.
and then there are other curious cases. The Irish writer Banville, he writes mysteries, but then he sort of goes back and forth now, right? He's not consistent.
I don't know what the hell happened. He was Benjamin Black. All the Quirk novels were Benjamin Black, and now he's got these other novels where Quirk's a character in them, and it's like John Banville. And then when I went to see Marlowe, it said based on the book Black Eyed Blonde by John Banville. I'm like, no, it's Benjamin Black that wrote that. So I was like, I'm a big fan of Benjamin Black's writing, his mystery writing. And I do not understand what happened there, but it's just mind-boggling to me. So anyway, yes, I totally hear what you're saying about that, because I think the Quirk novels are some of the best crime stuff written in the last 20, 25 years. It's great stuff.
He's a extraordinarily elegant writer, I think. I mean, I have a prejudice for all things Irish, including Grant's adopted last name.
Thank you.
Well, the other, of course, related kind of issue is, and this gets back to my students' anxiety, is I think that there's a subtext in this course, because it's a required course for the creative writing major, et cetera, is that if you do these things, if you create a really cool website, and if you have, a Twitter account, which of course is now an X account, which that's a whole nother thing, that you too will be successful. People will find your books and they'll buy them, and you'll get a house in the Hamptons, and you'll be talking to Oprah about your books. And I think that's a really misleading sort of subtext, because my sense is that there's very little positive correlation between having an online presence and people actually finding your books and buying your books and those kinds of things. I mean, I still think it's worth having, but it certainly isn't worth stressing over. And I did kind of a little experiment where in a little bit we're going to talk about a story in here. So I had this kind of lying around, and so I decided for one of my weekly little kind of mini lectures, and then when I was teaching that class, well, let's just look. I mean, so there's like 19 contributors to the Sycamore this particular issue of the Sycamore Review, which is a venerable, well-respected literary journal. So I thought, 19 contributors, how many of them have websites? And so I just started looking around, and I think I discovered that 10 of them have websites. Another couple of authors are part of other entities' websites. So if you Google them, you kind of find their authorial presence. And then some others maybe just sort of rely on social media. But among this, up and coming group of writers, they don't seem, it's about 50-50. Some, about half apparently think it's worthwhile to have a website, and about half apparently don't. And I suspect that's probably, in the ballpark of the number of writers. I mean, I ended up creating web pages for you two guys because you didn't have a web page, and I felt like for the press's purpose, it would be great if you had some kind of online presence. So we worked on that. But to be honest with you, I don't see a huge correlation between being active on social media and having a website and book sales, quite honestly. So which then, raises the question, what about all that time and energy one puts into tweeting and Instagramming and whatevering, if it really doesn't result in that many more people, or maybe any more people, finding your books and so forth. Now, the one exception is my academic book on trauma theory, which I republished in 2021. It by far is, I mean, I've got web pages for all my books, and it by far is the web page, the book page that gets the most traffic. And I get several hundred visitors a month on average, and it is my top selling book. But that means I sell maybe 5 or 6 copies a month. So those hundreds of visitations result in about a half dozen book sales, about half of which are Kindle books that I make like 35 cents a copy on. So, again, maybe there's a correlation between having a web page and visitations and book sales, but it's so nominal. Is it really worth the time and effort? And certainly it isn't worth any sleepless nights about what you have on there, what you should have on there, et cetera.
Well, I wonder, Ted, if it's kind of a platform thing. Like, I'm privileged to be an editor at North American Review. So although I don't have a strong web presence, people can get in touch with me through, 12 Winters. You've set up a place for me and Brady, but also they can get in touch with me through Submittable, sending stuff to North American Review, dropping a note saying hi, contacting one of the other editors who then contacts me. And so I have a kind of networking, not so much to publish my own work, but to be connected to other writers. And so I'm wondering how much of some of these web pages by young up and coming writers is a way to try to get connected with a larger community. And it's not just about marketing their own stuff or saying, look what I've done, look what I've done. It's ways of, perhaps connecting with other people and then say, hey, let's put you on a panel at EWP. I read your story and blah, blah, blah. Or let's do this project together or whatever. I'm just wondering if it's part of that. You got to network, because I remember being told that when I was coming out of Illinois with my, go to conferences, network. And so maybe this is a form of networking for younger folks that I'm able to not have to worry as much about, because I'm pretty advanced in my career, but also I have a platform. I have North American Review, which connects me to a writing community, and I have fellow editors that know me and recommend me, and people talk to me and blah, blah, blah. So I have a bit of a privileged position compared to some of these young folks coming out of MFA programs.
I've noticed on changing the subject, and so not answering Grant's questions, but yeah, I think networking must be part of it. But just to touch on something that Ted talked about, the online presence. I have a page on Instagram, a writer page, and what I've noticed then in my feed are all these ads for people who promise that they can help you promote your book. So actually, a lot of the initial traffic was people trying to get me to spend money or to talk to Ted and get Ted to invest some money into marketing. Yeah, I wonder if there's a demographic difference too in thinking about what Grant was speaking about, and the world of connections and getting in touch with other writers and living that kind of life. I wonder if younger folks find it somewhat more natural than perhaps I don't know, our generation.
I don't think that's true. I'm finding that so a lot of my students, especially these undergraduates, are traditional undergrad age or close to it, and many of them are not tech savvy at all. They really struggle with creating web pages, and they don't want to be on social media. They haven't been, and they want to be read. They want to have an authorial presence and have a readership, but they want their privacy too. And so that's a whole nother issue, because if you're putting yourself out there so that people can find your books, you're probably putting yourself out there in a way that they can find you too, which may or may not be, something that a lot of people do. So I don't know that there is a strong correlation between age group and comfort level when it comes to creating web pages, social media. The other thing I was going to say about social media too is it just changes so quickly. So like, I think you, Brady, you mentioned Facebook, or maybe Grant, or both of you, because a few years ago, that was it. That was the place to be if you were an author. You had to have a Facebook page. And now it's pretty much passe. I don't think a lot of people are really going to Facebook, especially looking for authorial pages. In just the 8-week stretch that I taught this course previously, and I just ended last week, and then the next 8-week stretch is going to start next week. But in just those 8 weeks, just to give you an example, Twitter went from being Twitter to X, so that changed, and then Elon Musk has other changes he's going to be doing. Instagram, which of course is owned by Facebook, initiated its Threads platform, so that's a brand new thing. So should people be migrating to that? TikTok, which has been one of the more reliable platforms, if you can get people spreading the word via the hashtag book talk, then people might find your work. Well, I read in the Times that they're thinking of starting their own publishing company and using the book talk hashtag exclusively to promote their own book, and not have it be something just. So in 2 months, basically, just those major or significant changes happen in platforms. So my point here is that if someone is really wringing their hands over, well, should I have an Instagram account or a Twitter account, or should I be on TikTok, or should I have a YouTube channel? Probably by the time they kind of figure it out and start getting going with something, it's going to change anyway, and it's no longer going to be the hot social media platform for authors. So again, it's just like a dog chasing its tail. I don't know that you can ever really catch up with what's trendy and what's happening, and to the point where you can sort of use it as a strategy for getting the word out there about your stuff, because again, the landscape just changes under your feet so quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you make a really good point about privacy. I know that's kind of where I'm at with all that stuff. I do my social stuff like doing theater, but I can hide behind other characters, and the whole idea of like I don't even enjoy AWP that much, to be honest with you. I go about every third year. It's going to be in the Midwest. I'll go for sure, but because it's close by. But because as an editor, I get so many people coming up to me, pitching their stuff and trying to make a connection. I feel I just feel overwhelmed. It's too much. I'm just not that sociable. I mean, I need my downtime, and that's why I stay up late at night, because I enjoy watching movies and having Grant time. So I'm contradicting myself compared to what I said earlier about networking, but I'm a very private person, so I totally get that of wanting to be below the radar. At the same time, want people to read my books. It's a complicated thing.
Margaret Atwood, on her webpage, she has a list of reminders about what it means to be on social media, and she says whatever you post is there forever. So yeah. I mean,
Right.
I can say on social media, really reluctant to have any pictures of family or anything personal. Hardly like talking about where I live. But at the same time,
Right.
trying to promote a connection and the profound feeling I have for a sense of region, sense of place, a sense of connectedness, sense of community, sense of friends. So yeah, it's complicated.
Well, the other issue too is, and this kind of came up in some of the discussion boards and stuff in this class I keep referencing, is some of these people who were tasked with creating web pages and social media accounts, etc. One of the things they had to do was to look at different authors' websites and to kind of get ideas about what do they like and what don't they like, and it made them realize that they've never looked at authors' websites before. Now these are people who are avid readers, who are themselves writers or want to be writers, and yet they realize they've never actually gone and looked at authors' web pages before, which of course brings up this whole other issue. If avid readers are not reading authors' web pages to find stuff to read, then again, is there really this idea that it's a key to success? And I was thinking about, I don't go to authors' web pages to find things to read. I mean, I read the New York Times every morning, and I think I find most of my suggestions for what to read by reading the book review or the book pages. Probably about the most frequently that I go to authors' pages as a teacher. If we're reading an author's novel or something, I might go to their webpage because they've got resources there. They've got interviews, they've got craft essays, they've got things like that. So then I can share that with my students. So I think as a teacher, I use author web pages much more than I do as a reader looking for books to buy, etc.
Yeah, and as an editor, I'll occasionally go to an author's page just because I'm curious. Like I'll be reading something and I'll say, "There's nothing in here that that's an outward sign of being written by a person of color, but there's just this feeling I have. There's one, so I want to find out. I'm curious, and then boom, I go to their website, and sure enough, or I'm reading something. I say, boy, this feels like an older author. Some of the word choices, and I go to the website, and they're like in their 20s, and I was totally wrong with that assumption. Yeah, so it's like sometimes just as an editor, I get this curiosity thing, and I'll go, but it's never really. I guess maybe the hope is agents will track you down, but if an agent likes your work in a literary magazine, what they usually do is contact the literary magazine and then have the literary magazine contact the writer and see if it's okay for them to contact them, and then they go ahead and contact them. I mean, in all my whole career, I had that happen to me once. That's why I know this story. And I sent them a novel I was not yet finished, and I rushed it to conclusion, and they only read the first chapter because it was a novel with alternating points of view, and they didn't even comment on the second perspective. So I sent the first 50 pages. Nat Sobel Agency, anyway, shout out to them. Thank you very much. So yeah, that was like, it was like a high and a low within weeks of each other. And but I think maybe that's the hope. Maybe that's the dream, is that, you know, someone will track you down and ask for something. But yeah, I don't go there to read their stuff, to be honest with you. I go there just in case I'm curious about something.
Yeah, I typically look at author pages, or look for an author page, if not to find something to read, but rather I've read something that I liked. And so in the last couple of days, been reading the story, Quinn Forlini. So I went to Quinn's homepage to see more and to check out some of the linked work. So closer to Ted's experience, I would say. A matter of if I admire somebody's work, then I'll take a look. But yeah, I can't think of too many books I've twigged to on somebody's web page and checked them out that way. I mean, there have been a few, but not the majority of my reading, for sure. It's in the air. People are talking about books.
So I think that's a good segue, Brady. I think we probably need to shift gears here. One of the things that we decided to do with our podcast, for anyone who's new to watching us, is each episode we're going to pick out a short story or some kind of writing from a recently published literary journal and just talk about it, just to try to give a little shout out to a writer who's done a really good job. And so for this episode, I looked at the winter-spring 2023 issue of Sycamore Review and found a short story that I think is really interesting and definitely worth talking about. Hopefully you guys feel the same way. I just also want to say that I had a really hard time picking out a story to send you guys because there are just so many great pieces of writing. It is such a shame because I think a lot of readers who love great writing literally don't even know that the best writing is going on in places like the Sycamore Review or 12 Winters Journal or whatever literary or North American Review. It's just this almost like underground of writing that so many readers aren't even aware of. Bookstores used to, and maybe they still do, the few that are left, carry some literary journals, but even that's just a tiny fraction of all the journals that are being published. But if you start looking around for like Sycamore Reviews and we read from Nimrod last month, like I said, North American Review publishes great stuff. We publish great stuff that you can really find great writing. So my biggest problem was deciding what to send you guys. But I opted for, as you know, and our listeners are about to know, a short story called Tears or It Doesn't Count by Quinn Forlini, as Brady has already sort of alluded to. And it's a little bit different in the sense that Quinn tells us before the story begins, all material is transcribed and collaged from episodes of Say Yes to the Dress. So it's a found short story, basically. And one of the reasons that I'm attracted to this is because one of my favorite classes to teach is in experimental writing, and I'm scheduled to teach it again in October. And one of the things we talk about in the experimental writing class is found material. Normally, we talk about found poetry because usually people use it in more concentrated doses where they find text from whatever source and then they appropriate it and rearrange it, manipulate it somehow into their own thing. And this is a little bit different in the sense that it's an entire short story. But that is what Quinn has done here. Let me just kind of read the first few sentences just to kind of get the flavor of this, and then we'll kind of jump in and I'll see what you guys have to think of it and so on. So it's divided into numbered sections, and the first section begins. I want the most unique wedding dress in the world. I want drama. I want pizzazz. I want to make an entrance. When I walk down the aisle, everyone's like, whoa. I'm looking for a dress that's absolutely over the top. Glamour, stoles, feathers. I'm looking for that wow, something exotic, something architectural. I think my mom has just brainwashed me since I'm a little girl, but my dream has a big satin skirt with a train. And I want my train to be about 10 feet long because when I'm walking down the aisle, when I'm here, I want people back there to still see parts of me. I want it to look like theirs, like jewels and beading falling off of me, like literally pearls and jewels just draping off the goddess walking down the aisle. And that's how this found story begins. So I will stop talking. And I'm curious to hear what you all think of this story.
I'll jump in. I thought it was great when I first read it. I thought Grant. I thought Ted must hate us because like we're dudes, and this story, this found story, if we and I don't know what Say Yes to the Dress is. I don't watch a lot of TV except for hockey, and so I don't know what the nature of the conversations are. But if we take it, and I have no reason not to take it at face value, the story is stunning. It's this world of insight into this crucial moment in the lives, and it seems it's about the lives of women, and so it's the kind of terrain of Atwood and Morrison and Monroe, that terrain that I love so well and read so frequently. The lives and experiences that I don't, as a dude, I don't have access to. We have daughters. But yeah, it's sort of stunning, and I'll stop nattering and let Grant jump in. But one of my favorite sections, the story is poignant. Parts of the experience being described kind of drove me crazy, but there's also a kind of, I found at least, a kind of cruelty in some of the exchanges, some of the things that are being said, and that was. Sort of stunning, both comic in some measure, horrifying in others. But it was, it was. There's something really great, I think, about this story and the way that all those elements of actual conversation have been fitted together, including revealing a kind of cruelty in this process. Yeah, it's
and I think what I like so much about it was we have, and I know it's kind of an overused term, but I'm going to use it. We have an unreliable narrator. We actually have two narrators, that was fascinating when the story opened up to mom's perspective, and then we kind of go back and forth in the sections. But I'm empathetic towards the character telling the story, whereas like in Bernard Malamud's Black is My Favorite Color, or Ring Lardner's The Haircut, where we have kind of these unreliable characters that I'm laughing at, or Jim Thompson's Population, whatever the hell it's called, 201, I can't remember the title, but it's from the perspective of a sheriff who's not all quite there, and we're sort of judging, we're kind of distant from. There's ways in which I'm aware of how the patriarchy is acting upon the character in this story, but I feel for her because right in the very first section, it ends with her raising a question that implies she knows something isn't quite right about this whole journey, but she can't figure it out. So at the end, when I don't want to give a spoiler here, but the last line of the story is for me totally earned because there's a way in which the whole questioning that she comes to at the end, which she doesn't understand why she's having a certain response she's having, fits back to the opening question at the end of section 1, if that makes sense. So I go on this journey with this character, and I'm just like, wow, like there's things I can see, and I wish she could see it. Like when she's putting on the dress and she's talking about how it makes her look great, and she uses the word corset. Anyone that's studied anything to do with representations of women knows how bad corsets were and how they could change your rib shape. And it's like the shoes in China, like the stories, the stuff with feet, we were taught, like, and
Feet binding.
feet binding. Thank you. And here we've got this corset, and like, I'm like, oh my God, don't you? And then, yeah. And then the parallel with the kid at the beginning said, I want. I'm like, oh my God, how narcissistic, how like, look at how many times the word I want are put together in the first section. And then when mom starts talking, it's like, how many times does she use the similes constructed with like? You look like this, you look like in her head, with all the cruelty that Brady was talking about. And so you can see these parallels between mother and daughter, just in sort of the ways in which language is used. And yeah, I found it absolutely stunning. And at the end, I was like, oh, this poor woman, she can, plus, like, to me, the whole myth of, like, when my wife and I, of course, now I do have to have this caveat. My wife's marriage to me was her second marriage, so she did do the big wedding the first time. Okay, but the fact is, when we got married, I was 25, she was 24. We went through all kinds of like counseling through the church, and the questions were, why do you want to get? It wasn't about what do you want to wear, how big, what kind of cards you're going to send out. It was about the values we had and the shared values, and raising those kinds of questions. And I think our wedding rings combined cost $130. We did everything simply, and because it wasn't about the ceremony, it was about us coming together as a couple and what we were going to contribute to the community. It was like there were bigger things involved, and it just seems like the way she gets sucked into this bridezilla culture and this whole idea of, like, oh, anyway, I was like, by the time I got to the end of the story, I was really feeling for her, because she's leaning into all the wrong questions, if that makes sense.
It's horrifying.
Hey, I've got a couple of things I want to respond to here, but before I meant to read Quinn's authorial biography here, right? That's something we've kind of been talking about. And so this is her contributor's note. It's not very long. Quinn Forlini has writing published or forthcoming in Catapult, Jellyfish Review, X-Ray, Long Leaf Review, and elsewhere. She earned her MFA from the University of Virginia and lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You can find her on Twitter, now called X, at Quinn Forlini. And as Grant mentioned, she does have a website, which is easy to find as well. There are a couple of things that, like I said, I really like experimental writing, and I like found work. And I think because this is a found story, and the fact we're told that from the beginning, it automatically creates a sort of subtext, or maybe a multi-subtext. And because even though, I mean, I know, I guess, kind of in general what Say Yes to the Dress is this reality TV show. Each episode, I suppose, is about a different young woman going to find the perfect dress. Again, I've never actually watched it, but I think I kind of know what it is. But since we know that all of these sentences came from episodes of that show, and it's supposedly reality TV, like Grant points out, a lot of this stuff is really hurtful and mean-spirited, and then she's alluding to being brainwashed as a kid and blah blah blah. And so, as I'm reading this, yes, I'm reading the story as Quinn has arranged it here and has done a masterful job of that, but simultaneously, at least part of my brain is contextualizing, okay, this was said in this other context, and how awful that must be. What must that scene have been like when a mom would say this to her daughter or whatever? And I'm really interested in authors who are able to do that, who have multi threads. You know, my idol William Gass experimented with that a lot, with that concept of having multiple narratives going on simultaneously. One of the ways he played with that was to have footnotes at the bottom of a page of a novella, where if you went down to the footnotes, you realize that they're telling a completely different story than what they're associated with in the text of the story. And it's just really fascinating to me. And so, again, because of the found nature, it's creating in my mind a multiverse of scenarios and stories, and not just the one that's on the page. Whereas if Quinn hadn't given us that bit of info here, and this was just a short story that came out of her imagination, it would still have an impact on me. I think I presume I would still like it a lot, but I don't think it would have had that sort of multi-layered textual sense to it.
Yeah, I agree. I heard lots of voices because of the introductory line of all these being found, and so the horror. You know, I also have to take a step back. You know, it's not a world I have access to, not a world I'm particularly interested in, but it's, you know, I'm not also in the business of gainsaying other people's experience and what they value. It seems horrifying to me, but I did hear all these different voices, which made the cruelty that much more profound. Like, in these heretofore private spaces before the cameras move in reality TV, the conversations that went on that other folks are not necessarily privy to, and then we're hearing, and then we're finding here arranged into this powerful story. Is this what goes on? Are these our lives? Is this what we want? You know, but you know, people are going to respond differently. Maybe this is exactly how people should be speaking to one another, and exactly the experiences they should be seeking. You know, who am I to say? But yeah, it's such a great idea and so well executed. Just a really finely done story.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's funny though, like I read it more as a straight story. Like I appreciate what you're saying, Ted, with the multi-layers and how that opening statement, but I read it more like an old-fashioned story with you know, a character that's not really, you know, self-aware, and I found that pretty gripping. So I could read it at that. It's kind of like when you watch the Batman TV show. When I'm 6 years old, I'm 66. I'm aging myself here, but I don't care. 1966, I'm watching this show with my dad. He's laughing his ass off, and I'm like throwing punches in the living room, and I've got my cape on, and I'm like, I'm Batman, you know, and Dad's like chuckling away. And then when I got into my teens, I'm in junior high, I rewatched the series, and I'm like, I get the farce element, you know, I get that other layer, but I was reading it more on a kind of just a straight literary story level. So I appreciate hearing what you guys are adding to it. So in terms of multiplicity of voices and textual layers, that's absolutely fascinating. But I think it can also just work. That's part of its charm. It can work on a straight ahead level too, you know? Yeah, so it's complex, and yet there's some kind of a through line to it that you can catch on to, I guess, is what I'm saying.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think those different ways of reading in tension with one another, we can hold them both and other. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's a really great short story. Yeah. It's compact. It's a gem, and it opens up in all kinds of complex ways. I don't think we, you know, because we don't want to give spoilers and whatnot, we're not sharing this with necessarily folks who have yet had a chance to read it. But yeah, there's so much more to be said about the content, about individual lines. Like if people actually said these, but then you reclaim it and you put it into a story, it changes, you know, has that kind of Borgesian, the rewrite of Pierre Menard, the rewrite of the Quixote. It takes on what it meant in that context. It takes on all these additional layers when you treat it again in the context of the story. And we don't have time or space or or occasion to touch on all that. But there's just a lot of great killer lines.
Or like when he's describing how he's the ideal guy, and it's like impossible to be all these things. But if you
75 things.
Yeah, firefighter, naval officer, wants to get back in the NBA. I mean, all that stuff. I was like, but if you cobble it from a bunch of different sources, well, then it makes sense. But if it's like a single person, I'm like, girl, you are dreaming. I mean, this is just not possible. So anyway, it was, I just found that a hoot when we got the sort of thumbnail sketch in a paragraph of who this fella is, her dream, her Prince Charming or whatever. So anyway, I thought that was great.
Yeah, actually, I was about to go to that paragraph in particular, Grant. I think I am going to read it in more detail here, but I want to read it in this context. One of my favorite writers is Robert Coover, and Coover made a sort of career out of ambiguity. So many of his stories and novels, he deliberately gives you multiple things that are going on, and there's no way of deciding which is true, quote unquote, and which isn't. I think so often in teaching writing, we try to get students to be very precise and clear, and you have to make decisions about who the character is and what are they doing. You can't be ambiguous, because if you are, you're not doing your job as an author or whatever. But Coover, on the other hand, took that ambiguity and pretty much made a whole fabulous writing career out of it. And so let me just kind of read that paragraph that Grant was alluding to here. It says, he is definitely the man of my dreams. Everything I was looking for. He's funny. He's handsome. 6'6", gorgeous man. He has the biggest smile. He has the cutest dimples. He's so smart, like super duper smart. He's a successful neurosurgeon. He's super daring. He had served in the Marines and also was a naval officer. He's a firefighter and a personal trainer, and now he's trying to get back into the AA. He's adventurous and goofy. He's got the biggest heart. He is so caring. He loves the Lord. He understands the importance of family. He is just one of the most romantic men I've ever met. He is the sweetest, most humble, down-to-earth person that I've ever met, and he's just my soulmate. I've never found anyone in my life that, like, he was put on this earth for me. He's my best friend, and I just feel so blessed. I feel like there's no other man in the world that could make me feel the way that he does. I can't imagine my life without him. And again, like Grant was saying, all of that stuff can't possibly be true, but it's okay. It's okay, because it works just wonderfully within the context of the story.
Well, and then I can't help but thinking the whole time, maybe this it shows a too cynical view of life on my part. But the punchline to that paragraph is, and then a week after we got home from the honeymoon, he just hung out with his bros. I never saw him again. Too cynical.
All right. Well, I think the street lights are coming on here. We got to keep these things relatively brief, but I think we did a good job of giving a few chops to Quinn for a great story, and Sycamore Review for publishing it in the first place. I don't know. Do you guys have any final thoughts or sign-offs before we ride off into the sunset?
As opposed to worrying about finally, your web page, your Instagram, your Facebook presence, X, Threads, whatever's going on. I don't think Ted said this, but just to reinforce it, all that stuff is a time sink where you might be doing something else. You might be writing a really good sentence, or you might be reading a really good book. So don't go down too many rabbit holes.
Or watching Say Yes to the Dress. Yeah. No, that's a great point, Brady. Grant, do you have anything you want to end on?
No, I'm all for watching stuff like Yes for the Dress. You just don't know what. junk culture, and I'm sorry to be judgmental here, can trigger all kinds of wonderful things as artists. Like right now, I'm on a Paul Naschy kick. He's was this Spaniard who did horror. He was the Lon Chaney of Spain, and I've been watching some of his monster movies, and it's given me ideas for my own work. So I say embrace the high and the low and everything in between. There's always stuff there to inspire good writing.
Well said. All right. Well, we will sign off there. We'll be back together next month, I presume, to talk about some more writing related stuff. Thanks, guys. And I will hit the stop recording button.